What up, it's Dane here. In this video, I'm going to be telling you how many calories you need to be eating and munching every single day to gain some muscle mass. So first of all, as we all know, or you may not know, we need to eat in a calorie surplus in order to gain significant amount of muscle mass. It's important that I say significant amount of muscle mass because you can still gain muscle mass well in a small calorie deficit. So here's exactly how we're going to calculate a calorie surplus. For males, do 17 times your body weight in pounds, and for females, do 16 times your body weight in pounds. Now keep in mind, this is just going to give you a little rough estimate. Don't take this as like a nail in a coffin or some shit like that. It's not just an exact number that's going to work for everyone. You need to kind of track your calories and see how much are you actually gaining, which I'll get into a second. So now that we've established our calorie surplus, let's talk about how much weight gain or even muscle gain should we aim for per month or even per year. Okay, so if you're a beginner, you're in 1 year of training, you should be aiming for maybe about 3 pounds on a scale or something like that, because you can gain about, let's say, 20 to 25 pounds of muscle per year, which is really good. That's why when like you first start out and people, they see you the next time, they're like, are you on steroids? No, it's just called a newbie gains. Now in the second year of training, it lowers a bit more, which only means you can gain 1 pound of muscle per month without gaining excessive fat, which obviously means about 10 to let's say 12 pounds of muscle. And then the third year, that halves again, which basically means 6 pounds of muscle per year. And then the fourth year, it's not really worth calculating that too much. But keep in mind, this is all with proper training, because let's face it, a lot of people have been training maybe 1, maybe 2 years in the gym, but they're following this bro split. They suffer from fuck around tightness, they don't track their workouts, they're not sure and they're progressing. So proper training is the key word here. So now that I've told you that, let me tell you how big of a calorie surplus you should be eating, because this varies from person to person. So for someone that's really new to the gym, that's a newbie, that's a beginner, they can actually have a bigger calorie surplus compared to someone that's very advanced. So the reason you can actually have a bigger calorie surplus as a newbie, as a beginner, you can have some fun with your calories, is because when you start out, you're very far from your genetic muscular potential. Whereas if you've been training for 3, 4, 5 years, you're very close to your genetic muscular potential, which means you cannot really gain as much muscle mass anymore. So the closer you are to your genetic muscular potential, so let's say 5 years of training plus, your muscle gain is going to be very minute, meaning you're not going to want a calorie surplus of maybe 500 plus calories, because that's just going to mean excessive fat gain and very little muscle gain. So let's get down to the numbers. So a calorie surplus that I would recommend for a beginner would be about 500 calories. For an intermediate person that's been training maybe 2 to 3 years of proper training, I'd recommend a surplus of maybe 300 to 400. And advanced athletes that's like 4 plus 5 years, those people, they're gonna have a smaller calorie surplus because again, they're closer to their genetic muscular potential. So therefore, maybe about 200 to 300 calories. So here's how you can find it out. Do 15 times your body weight in pounds. That's gonna give you your calorie maintenance. Now, if you're a beginner, plus 500, if you're intermediate, plus 300, and if you're advanced, plus 200. Okay, now keep in mind, this is not set in stone, because a lot of people, even from the science-based industry, you'll hear a lot of people say, okay, no, go for a larger calorie surplus, maybe for about 500 calories, just so you don't miss out on some of the muscle gain that you could have got. And other people would say, shoot for a calorie surplus of about 170 calories per day, which I have recommended in some of my videos. However, this can vary to person. For example, I take a calorie surplus of about 300 to 500, right? Most of the time 500, because I don't mind gaining a little bit of fat, and then I just do a mini cut. A mini cut basically means cut for like 4 weeks, maybe a little bit of an aggressive one. It doesn't have to be, but that's just the style that I like to go most of the time. So that's that. It's not set in stone at all. But one thing I have to say is I wouldn't really recommend a high calorie surplus. Then about, let's say, 500 plus for beginner, and no more than 500 for intermediate. And for advanced, let's face it, going over 500 plus, it's gonna probably lead to a bit of more fat gain than it is muscle gain. So for your conservative guys that like to take risks in life, you go for small calorie surplus. But for us people that love risks, we can take a bigger calorie surplus and just enjoy some food, you know, some real food, some tasty shit. So one thing I have to mention, at the start of the video I did say do 17 times your body weight in pounds for calorie surplus, which you can do, is absolutely fine. It'll probably work for some beginners and maybe for some intermediates, But if you want to get really dialed in, just use the alternative route like I just spoke about before. So let's face it, man, I can tell you how many calories to eat per day or whatever, but if I don't tell you how much protein you need to eat per day, then how are you actually going to build muscle mass? Because we all know that the #1 macronutrient when it comes to packing on some size is our protein. So one thing I have to mention is that your protein intake doesn't need to be as high, whereas if you're in a calorie deficit, your protein requirements are normally a lot higher, especially if the calorie deficit is larger. So therefore, when you're in a calorie surplus, I recommend a protein intake of about 0.8 grams per pound of body weight to 1 gram per pound of body weight if you want to be safer. Most of the time, I suggest people just go 1 gram per pound of body weight. So that's how many calories you need to eat per day in order to gain good muscle, and also how much protein you need to have per day. However, that said, this video probably wouldn't be complete if we talk about the other 2 macronutrients, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. So a lot of people will obsess over tracking their carbohydrate and fat intake, and most of the time this is just irrelevant. The reason I say this is because it's just a lot more stressful trying to track your carbohydrate intake, your fat intake, and just like changing it every single week or whatever. It's just a lot harder to do that. Whereas if you just concentrate on your total calories and your protein amount, it will reduce the stress and it will actually increase adherence to the diet and sustainability for a longer period of time, which is way superior over like a crash diet. Now the reason I say this is because from person to person, some people prefer higher carbohydrate intake, some people prefer higher fat intake. Now, one thing I have to mention, if you're an active individual that's always playing sports, like weight training maybe 6+ times a week, just really active, not just like exercise itself, but also in their lifestyle, their day-to-day job and stuff like that, then I do recommend a higher carbohydrate intake for yourself, because we all know carbohydrates are the primary source of energy. That's like 101 fitness. But fat, when it comes to fat, this is very important for hormone regulation, right? It's very important for hormones. So if you are not gonna really worry about your fats, just make sure you have maybe fats in every single meal, just a little bit. If you don't know what fats are, that's like olive oil, avocados, like nuts, nut butters, all those kind of things, olives. These are all healthy fats. If you have all them or just a little bit of that in a meal, or even just like foods that contain fat, for example yogurt, like full fat yogurt, you will still get your fats in. That way you don't need to obsess over your carbohydrate and fat intake. So that's that. Those are the 2 macronutrients that, in my opinion, most people obsess way too much over. But again, one thing I have to clarify, and I won't talk for much longer, is that your carbohydrate intake shouldn't be very, very low if you're in a calorie surplus, or should I say a mass gaining phase, trying to gain a lot of muscle mass. Because if you train 6 times a week with a lot of volume, you will perform a lot better with a higher carbohydrate intake. So that's that. That's how many calories you should eat per day in order to gain muscle mass and your protein intake. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe down below, share it with your friends that don't know how many calories to eat per day, or your friends that like some dirty bulk. Now one thing I'll probably say on dirty bulk just before we end the video is the main reason why people don't recommend dirty bulking is because the calorie surplus gets out of hand. For example, if you just eat pizza, pancakes, waffles, donuts, whatever inside, just those kind of quote-unquote junk foods, they contain a lot of calories and it's very hard to control your calorie intake, meaning the calorie surplus is going to be about 700 to 1000, leading to more excessive fat gain compared to muscle gain. Now actually, one thing I really forgot to mention is that if your calorie surplus actually gets out of hand, if you just, let's say you finish a cutting phase, then you go straight into a bulking phase, like massive 1000 calories per day surplus. Now, this is so important that you don't do this. Here's why. Because your muscles actually become, let's say, a bit immune to muscle growth, right? They're not as sensitive to muscle growth if you're just having 1000+ calorie surplus per day. So keep that in mind. So that's that. End of the video now. I'm finished talking. Stay positive. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, let's get it. I'll see you in the next one. And actually, I'm hungry now.
No, there ain't no stopping us.